So, welcome to everybody's favorite day, the last one. Only a couple of things to go through today. We're going to go through a really short lesson right now about getting integrations ready for production and backing them out of production. And then we're going to go through test mode, where I'm going to do a demonstration and what I hope will be a review of test mode, maybe beyond what you saw in your Boomi training. But our integrations are probably a bit more complex than what you are working with in your Boomi training. So that's why I want to do a review so that you're able to navigate all the way through the sub processes during a test mode operation. Then I want to have a discussion about what to expect for support after the workshop in terms of resources available to you, request processes for support, as well as template copying. And then we'll have the rest of the day to work on an independent lab. So hopefully I can get all of this done before lunch so that you have the entire second half of the class just to work on the independent lab. So let's jump right into this short lesson about getting integrations ready for production and backing them out. All right, so you have been doing all of your work for an integration in the customer's non-prod tenant. And at some point, you're going to get it right. And you're going to say, okay, this is ready for production. What do I have to think about to get this integration over to production and get it set up for a production run? Well, the first thing is in Boomi. We need to deploy it to the production's environment. And all we have to do is just deploy the latest version of the code over to the production environment. So that's easy. But once you do that, it'll be in the production environment for the first time, which means anything you've deployed or anything you extended is blank. So now that you've deployed it to the production environment, you now have to go to the production environment extensions, and we need to set those up. So the API gateway is going to be the vanity URL of the production tenant /API. The SFTP credentials for the UKG internal connector is going to be the SFTP internal, the production internal SFTP credentials. The process properties, these you're going to want to reevaluate and retype as necessary. Sometimes the way we set up our control process properties or our other process properties while we're testing is a little bit different from the way we would do it for a production run. So for your process properties, you have to ask yourself, what should this be set for a production run, not necessarily testing. With the exception of the process properties that have your cross-reference table headers, because the structure of the cross-reference tables isn't going to be different between non-prod and prod, you can just copy those over exactly, or recreate them exactly. As far as the cross-reference tables themselves, that's a little trickier of a conversation, because most of our cross-reference tables are translating setup data from one system to another system. And if the setup data is the same between your prod and your non-prod tenant, then you probably have all the same entries in the cross-reference table, and you can just download it from your non-prod tenant and upload it to your prod tenant. But if the setup data is different, then you need somebody who is familiar with the setup data to review the cross-reference table before your production run to make sure everything that's needed is in there. So, for example, if you're translating accrual codes, have somebody who's familiar with the accrual configuration review the cross-reference table to make sure that all of your production accrual codes are accounted for that are needed in there. And like I said, if the setup data is different between production and non-prod, the cross-reference table may have been working in non-prod, but when you get it over to production, it might stop working because you're missing stuff. So if the setup data is different, you need somebody to review it to make sure everything's there. And in terms of setup data, setup data manager is a tool that we use to copy setup data from one tenant to another tenant. So we can copy our non-prod setup data over to prod without having to recreate it. You can just copy it over. And there is some setup data for integrations. There's installs, list parameters, and sets. You don't have to recreate those in production. You can just copy them over with with SDM. So that's nice. Now, what about the opposite? What if you have an integration in production that the customer says they no longer want that? Can you please remove it? And you'll run into this at some point, especially if you have a customer that's migrating. They'll have some temporary integrations that they need to facilitate the migration. But once they're through the migration, they don't need those temporary integrations anymore. And can you please remove them so that somebody doesn't accidentally run them? Yes, we can. But when you have setup data that's being referenced by other setup data, you can't just delete it because there's something else referencing it. So you have to back it out in a certain order. So for example, if you have an install that's being referenced by a scheduled event, right? You can't just delete the install. The system won't let you. You'd have to first delete that scheduled event so there's no more reference to it. Also, if you have an integration that's being referenced as a step within an integration set, you can't just delete the install because there's a set referencing it. The system won't let you. You would have to edit that integration set to remove that step. And then when you have no more references to the install, you can delete the install. And what's nice is when you delete an install, it will automatically remove it from any generic data access profiles that had it on the allowed side. So you don't have to manually edit the GDAPs. The system will back them out for you. And at that point, the users won't be able to see them anymore. Right? Also, if you had created a parameter list that was only being used by that integration, then it would be safe to remove the parameter list as well. And then it's out of the user interface for WFM, but it's still in Boomi. So on the Boomi side, if you want to undeploy that process from the tenant's environment, you can do that, right? Go to the deployments page, use the little gear icon for that deployed process on that tenant and undeploy it. And that will also back out any environment settings out of that environment as well. But you'll still have all the packages that you were building along the way. Version 1, version 2, version 3, version 4, version 17. And all those packages are retained because that's how we facilitate rollbacks. So if you screw up version 17, you can always go just redeploy version 16. But all those individual packages, if you don't need those anymore, those can be deleted. But you'll still have your source code in the build folder. And I have here optional delete the folder in the Boomi Designer, but I'll be honest, nobody does that. Instead, what we typically do is we create another folder called deleted items, and we just move it into there just to get it out of the way of the active folders. Because you know what's going to happen if you delete it. They're just going to come back and they're going to say, well, you know, I think I want something else that was just like the other one. And if you deleted it, then too bad. There is an undelete, but it's safer just to move the folder to a deleted items folder. And then also optional, if that integration that nobody cares about anymore had put a whole bunch of records into the transaction assistant that nobody wants to see anymore, you can just, you know, mass delete those records from that particular batch name. And that will just get them out of the way so that the users don't have to look at them anymore. You don't have to do that. That's just you being a nice person. But this is the proper sequence for backing out an integration. And hopefully it makes sense because it's kind of the opposite order of how we put things in. But interestingly enough, it's not very well documented, but this is the proper sequence for backing out an integration. And that's it for that little lesson. Any questions on getting things ready for production or backing them out? Right. So based on everything we've been doing in the non-prod tenant, hopefully all that just makes sense. All right. So let's talk about test mode. All right. Probably one of my favorite features of Boomi, because you can see the execution of an integration shape by shape. You can see the data flowing through the integration. You can see the shape by shape logs. It's an important skill to have as a developer. It's an important skill to have as a troubleshooter. And what I'm talking about is I'm talking about using the test mode button, not running it on a tenant, but running it within the Boomi designer. And that presents a problem for us because our integrations are designed to receive an XML from WFM, because WFM is normally initiating the running of the integration. And there's some important information created by WFM that our programming needs to pick up. If you are running the integration manually, then there's no XML coming in, right? And that presents the problem because our programming needs that information. Now, also, web service start shapes are not supported in test mode because it's a real-time listener. So we're going to have to change the start shape to a no data start shape. And that's the start of the whole problem, right? There's no data coming in. So there's a workaround we have to do to get our integrations to work in test mode. And what you're going to find in all of our templates and in the framework are these two shapes disconnected off to the side. And these are here just in case you have to put this template into test mode. This gives us a way to manually inject the XML just as if it came in off of WFM so that our programming has what it needs to do to work. Right? So this is the workaround that I'm talking about, right? We have to configure these two debug shapes and connect them into the flow, right? So first things first, we change the start shape from a web service to a no data start shape. That's the first thing we have to do in the workaround. The second thing we have to do in the workaround is configure these two shapes and connect them into the flow. The message shape is going to have the XML in it that our programming needs to pick up. And where does that XML come from? Well, we can go to process reporting, find something that ran on our tenant earlier, copy that XML out of that process report and paste it into this message shape. And the information that's in that XML is tenant specific. It's got a tenant ID, it's got an app key, it's got an environment name. It's very specific to a particular tenant. So we have to go to the process report of something that ran on our tenant so that we have the right XML. It doesn't have to be the same integration. It just has to be something that ran on our tenant. So we'll copy and paste that into this message shape. Now, also in that XML is some cookie information that we're going to use for the authorization header of all of our API calls. But the cookie information that's included in there in whatever XML you just copied has probably long since expired. So the XML will be good, but the cookie in the XML won't be good. So that's why there's two shapes here. What we'll do is we'll edit that XML and put variables for the cookie information, and then feed those variables from a set property shape. And what we can do is we can go out to a live session, borrow its cookie information, copy and paste it into that set property shape, and that will get injected into the XML. It'll be a good cookie, and now our integration will work as expected. So at a high level, that's the workaround, right? Change the start shape to a no data start shape, copy and paste the XML, edit the cookie information with variables, and then copy and paste a live cookie into the variables. And then it'll work fine. So if you've got some pretty good copy and paste skills, you can take any integration template and turn it into test mode ready in probably 2 minutes. But the first time you see this, it's probably going to look a little weird to you. If you've never copied and pasted XML from process reporting before, this is going to be new to you. If you've never edited XML before, this is going to be new to you. If you've never gone into developer tools to take a look at live cookie information, this is going to be new to you. So there may be a few steps that I'm going through here that you've never seen before. So it may be, the first time you see this, it's a little weird. But at the end of the day, it will make sense, and it's really just copy and paste with a couple of edits. So, like I said, as long as your copy and paste skills are good, you got this. So, first things first, right? So we need the XML from something that ran previously on our tenant. And again, it has to be something that ran on our tenant because there's tenant-specific information in that XML. It doesn't have to be the same integration. It just has to be the same tenant. So like I can go to a process report for the accrual balance reset and borrow its XML to troubleshoot my punch import. It doesn't have to be the same integration as long as it's something that ran on my tenant. So if you go into a process report, the very first connector tile is going to be the web services server. And if you click on the document that flowed through that, you can use the gear icon to view that document. And what flows through the start shape, it's the XML document. So you'll be viewing that XML. Just copy that and paste it into that message shape. And now you'll have the XML. Now, in the XML, and remember, our XML is just a set of process properties, and each process property is a value and name pair. The value is before the name, right? Which is kind of weird to me. Most times I see it as name value pairs. This is value name pairs. So the value is before the name in the process property. So the value for the integration token is going to be this big, long string of meaningless characters that you just don't care about. So I'm going to replace that big, long string with curly bracket 1, curly bracket, a Boomi variable that's referenced down below. Now, that value needs to be surrounded by double quotes, right? This is XML, so that string needs to be within double quotes. So I just want to replace that big long string with curly bracket 1, curly bracket, and keep the double quotes so that when the variable substitution happens, that value stays within the double quotes. And then the same thing for the other part of the cookie, the integration service identifier key. The value is going to be this big long string of characters that I'm going to replace with curly bracket 2, curly bracket. So there's actually a third change I want to make, right? So replace the value of the integration token with the number 1 variable, replace the value of the integration service identifier key with the number 2 variable. And the very first property in the file is going to be Falcon Execution ID. And we use this Falcon Execution ID for all the callbacks so that we say, for this particular execution, set the callback status to in progress or set the status to completed. And here's the run summary totals for this particular execution, right? So that's done by all the callbacks. But if you borrowed the XML from something else, I don't want to make it look like that is rerunning. I don't want to overwrite that's run summaries. So to prevent me from doing that, engineering has written the callback API to look for a Falcon execution ID of -1. And if you send it -1, then it won't commit the callbacks. So it won't look like the accrual balance reset is running. I won't overwrite the accrual balance reset run summary totals. I'll just make sure that I change the value of the Falcon execution ID to -1. That way it won't commit the callbacks. So like I said, we copy and paste the XML and we have to do 3 edits. Once we do that, this XML will forever be good, right? Because the only thing that would change is every time I come in here and do a new test mode, I'm just going to need a fresh cookie, a fresh session cookie. But that's been variablized, right? And I'm going to put this the cookie separately. So once I edit this XML, it will forever be good. If I come back in this afternoon, do some more testing, I don't have to edit this XML. If I come in 6 weeks from now, I don't have to edit this XML. It'll still be good for my tenant. If I come back in 6 months from now, right, again, it's still the same XML. The only thing that's going to be different is the cookie information, and that's why we variabilized it. So we just have to set up this XML the first time. And now anytime I want to do test mode for this integration, I've already got the XML set up. All right, so that's the first part. Can I walk through the Falcon execution ID again? Sure, the Falcon execution ID is the integration execution from the WFM side. So, you know, this is the first integration I'm running is the accrual balance reset. The second integration I'm running is the punch import. The third integration I'm running is another accrual balance reset. Each time you execute an integration, it gets a unique execution ID behind the scenes. And we use this in our callback APIs so that when we're setting the integration status to in progress, they'll see that accrual balance reset is now in progress. The callback updates the system. And at the end of the integration, we do another callback that says, set the status to completed, and here's the run summary totals for this particular execution run. And then we send those totals up to the system. I don't want to overwrite those totals, and I don't want to make it look like my accrual balance reset is in progress when I'm just using that same. If I was to use that same Falcon execution ID that I borrowed from the accrual balance reset to do my testing in the punch import, because test mode is live API calls, right? You are updating the system. So I don't want to overwrite my run summary totals from whatever integration I borrowed its XML from. So I'm going to replace the Falcon execution ID from whatever integration I borrowed it from to -1. That way, when the callbacks happen during my test mode execution, the -1 says, don't commit this API call to the database. So it doesn't overwrite the run summary totals that are in there.
Thanks.
Yep, you're welcome. All right. So like I said, once we set up this XML, it will forever be good. So now all we need to do is get a cookie from a live session. Well, to do that, we need to log into WFM as a user that has the appropriate function and data access rights to do what this integration needs to do. And then we'll borrow that user's cookie from their browser. And we'll copy and paste that into that set property shape. So to do that, we're going to use the developer tools that are built into our browser. And both Chrome and Edge use similar developer tools, if it's not the same. The navigation to get there, well, I'll show you the navigation in a bit. But the developer tools, if you've never been in a browser's developer tools before, you're probably going to land on the Elements tab. We want to go to the Application tab, because on the Application tab is where you'll see the cookie information for the sessions that are active in your browser. And you'll see that there's a cookie for your WFM logon. And if you look at the cookie information, if you select the cookie, there's going to be a big, long list of fields that your browser is maintaining for that cookie. It's a big, long, confusing list if you've never worked with this before. So what I recommend doing is filtering this big, long list by authn. Because we use authn authentication to our API, just filter the list by authn, and it'll give you a much shorter list to look at. But what we're looking for is the authn token. That's the value we want to copy and paste over to the set property shape. And the authn SSID, that's that integration service key that I want to copy and paste over to that set property shape. So these are the two values that we want to copy and paste, right? We're borrowing a cookie from a live session, and that we're going to use for API calls. And this is one of the reasons why people don't trust cookies in browsers, is because they can be hijacked and used for other purposes, which is exactly what I'm telling you to do. So it's not my intent to turn you into hackers, but we're going to borrow the cookie from a live session and use it for different API calls behind the scenes. But remember, this is being used as an authorization header in the API calls. So this means that you've already logged into the system, right? Which you have, you got a cookie, and it will inherit your function data access rights of whatever user you logged in as. So if you log in as Sean Ivan, this is the cookie for a Sean Ivan session. My API calls will be done as Sean Ivan. So this is what I mean. Just copy and paste the authn token, copy and paste the authn SSID, and now you've got the cookies from a live session. It sounds like a lot of steps the first time you hear this, because this may be things you haven't done before. So what I've done in your course book for this lesson of using test mode, what I did in the course book is I made this lesson one big job aid on how to turn an integration into test mode, so that you can reference this after the class as a reminder of how to set up an integration for test mode. All right, so step one, change the start shape to a no data start shape. Because right now it's a web services start shape. We need to change it to a no data start shape. Step two, connect these two debug shapes into the flow. Step three, go out to process reporting, find something that ran on your integration, click on the web services tile, view the document that flowed through it, copy and paste that into the debug XML. There are 3 edits you have to do. Replace the value of the Falcon execution ID with -1, parameterize or variabilize, the integration token and integration service identifier key with #1 and #2 variables. Might look something like this. Log into your browser as somebody with the appropriate function and data access rights. Open developer tools in your browser. And on the application tab, you'll see the cookies, and you want to copy and paste the authn token and copy and paste the authn SSID. And it might look something like this, right? So this is just a job aid to remind you on how to do this, because I'll show you, and we'll do a lab together But like I said, this may be the first time you're seeing a bunch of these steps, so you may not remember it all. So you can use this course book as a reminder of how you did that. All right, so once you have that set up for test mode, you're going to click on the test button. And when you're starting a test mode, you have to pick an atom and just use your regular tenant atom for that. But you're just using the atom. You're not using the tenant environment. You're just using the atom. For the environment, test mode has its own environment, and you have to set up your test mode environment extensions the same way you would a tenant environment. So you're going to have to set up your API gateway server URL. You're going to have to set up your SFTP credentials. You're going to have to set up your process properties. You have to set up your cross-reference tables the same way you would a tenant environment. But just like all extensions, once you set them up, it will forever remember it. So if you come back in this afternoon, your extensions will still be there. If you come back in 6 months from now, your extensions will still be there. It's just the first time we have to set these up. Right? Now, another thing we like to do when we're testing is we like to use not send our test documents up to the customer's SFTP sites for a couple of reasons. One, if I start putting my test documents up there, it may raise unwanted questions from the customers, like, what are these files out there? And secondly, I'm just too darn lazy. I would rather bypass the retrieve source data subprocess with a message shape so that I can just copy and paste my test document into the message shape. And I don't have to put anything up on the SFTP account. In fact, I don't even have to call the SFTP account. I'm putting my file directly into the flow with this message shape. And I prefer doing this because when I'm testing, I'm just using a handful of test cases. And I like to do a test run with certain cases. And when those work, I'll put in different cases. I'll just copy and paste in some different information, do test run again. Then I'll change my test cases again, do another test run, change my test cases, do another test run. Without having to re-upload files to the SFTP server, I can just directly change my test cases right in the message shape. So this makes things much easier for us while we're testing. Just don't forget to put it back when you're done, right? So this is cool for testing, but when you're done testing, put back the retrieve source data. Now, also, if you're not going to call the SFTP server because we bypassed it, then you don't have to provide the SFTP credentials in your test mode environment because you're not going to call it SFTP. So this is a handy little trick to do. Now, there are some limitations of test mode that you'll want to be familiar with. The first thing is that it's going to inherit the function and data access rights of the user whose cookie you borrowed. So make sure you're logging in as somebody who can do what this integration needs to do. There's also a limit of 200 test documents. So you may not be able to rerun an entire file, production file. In test mode, you'll have to make sure that it's got fewer than 200 lines in the source file. So there's a limit of 200 test documents. Personally, that's way too much. I only like testing a dozen or so records or less, even better. And I just like testing a few cases at a time to keep it very focused. So I would never do 200 test documents, but that is a limit in test mode. Try-catch shapes do not process auto retries. That's not a problem. We don't have auto retry turned on in our try-catch shapes. Test mode is limited to an aggregate data size of 20 meg across the entire process. This is also not a problem for us, so don't worry about it. But what they're talking about is there is some things that get loaded into memory when you're running in test mode. And probably the biggest thing that gets loaded into memory is the cross-reference tables. And some of our customers have really large cross-reference tables. And in the past, test mode was limited to 10 meg across the entire process. And for our really large customers, we were hitting that 10 meg ceiling. So Boomi doubled it for us to be 20 meg. And now we have never come close to that 20 meg ceiling, even for our largest of customers with the largest of cross-reference tables. So yes, it's limited to 20 meg, but you'll never hit that limit. Test mode does not support real-time triggering. Bummer. That's what the listener process is. That's why we have to do this workaround. And test mode does not support parallel processing and flow control shapes. Well, we do support parallel processing in our flow control shapes. But if you remember, we have the ability to turn it on and off with a control process property. So what we can do is, well, if we're working with an integration that is set up for parallel processing, we can just change that process property to false. So it doesn't use parallel processing for this test mode execution. So we can just change that process property, do our test mode, and then put it back when we're done. All right. So we're going to do two things. One, I'm going to do a demonstration that you are not going to follow along with. You're just going to watch me. And then we're going to do a lab where we're going to do it all together. Right? So I'll do a demo first before we do the lab all together. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to put my accrual balance reset import into test mode. And I'll go through the configuration so you can see all that. And then we'll run it in test mode and we'll follow the flow. And I'll give you a little tour of test mode. And then we'll do a lab all together. Right? So this is just a demo I'm going to do now. Don't follow along with me. Just watch me. So let me log in as Sean. Make my way over to the Boomi Designer. And I'm going to put my accrual balance reset into test mode. So in the main process, we have these two debug shapes that are disconnected and off to the side. That's what I need to configure. But first, I'll change the start shape, which right now is a connector. It's a web services connector, and it's using my accrual balance reset listener operation. I need to remember that because I'm going to have to put it back when I'm done. But I'm going to change it from a connector to a no data start shape. And when I change it to a no data start shape, Boomi is going to say, well, if you have an integration that's no data, you shouldn't be running more than one instance of this at the same time, which I'm not going to be. I'm only going to be using one. I'm only going to be running one test mode execution at a time. Excuse me. So we don't care about this. You can either ignore it or just say, make the recommended change for me so it shuts up. But it doesn't matter. Excuse me. All right, so that's the first step. Change the start shape to a no data start shape. The second step is to connect these two shapes into the flow. And this will give us a way of injecting the XML into the flow just as if it came in from WFM. But the message shape is where I'm going to copy and paste that XML. Now, if there's XML already in here that isn't for your tenant, don't try and edit it. Delete it and copy and paste in good XML from your tenant. And unfortunately, I've seen this. I've seen templates in our gold library where the message shape wasn't emptied out before they put it into the template library. And the XML that's in there was XML from one of our developer tenants, the developer who created the template, and they forgot to empty out this message shape. If there's XML in there already that's not for your tenant, do not try and edit it. You can't. You don't know what should be in there. So just delete it and copy and paste good XML. But it should be empty like this if you've never done it before. So I need to put XML in here from something that ran previously on my tenant. So I need to go to process reporting for that. If I just click on process reporting, it's going to close my build tab in favor of the process reporting tab. I prefer to have both tabs open at the same time. So instead of clicking on process reporting, I'm going to right click on process reporting and say open link in new tab. That way my build tab stays open, but now I also have process reporting and I can just go back and forth. So on the process reporting tab, I have to find something that ran on my tenant previously, and I am 363. So I have to go back to find something that ran on my tenant, and I didn't run anything in the last hour or so, so I have to go back 24 hours. I went to my specific tenant, which is 363, and I ran a punch import yesterday. I can use the XML from my punch import to troubleshoot my accrual balance reset. That's fine, as long as it's on the same tenant. That's the important piece. So I'll click on the date and the time for the process report. And the very first shape tile is the start shape. One document flowed through that start shape. It's the XML that came in from WFM. And I can use this gear to view that document. And here's the XML that came in from the start of this integration run. And you can see the information that's in there is tenant specific. Right? The information that's in here is specific to this particular tenant. So it has to be XML that came from this tenant. If it looks pretty like this, it's because formatted view is turned on for this document viewer. If formatted view is turned off, it's the same XML. But and that's all we want. So we just want this raw XML copied and pasted. If you've got formatted view turned on, it's the same XML, pretty, but it's the same XML. But it also gives you line numbers. And we don't want the line numbers. We just want the XML. So if you're going to use formatted view, like I always use formatted view, when I copy and paste this XML, as I'm dragging my mouse, I want to make sure that I'm keeping my mouse on the right side of the line numbers because I don't want the line numbers. I just want the XML. So I'm dragging my mouse, keeping it on the right side of the line numbers. And I need the entire XML from the opening bracket down to the closing bracket. It needs to be good XML. So I'll copy this, Control C, back over to my build tab into the message shape and paste it there. And if I scroll up to the top, there are 3 edits that I need to make. The first edit I need to make is the Falcon execution ID, which right now was the Falcon execution ID from that punch import that I ran yesterday. Well, I don't want to overwrite its run summary, and I don't want to make it look like the punch import is running again. So I'm going to change the Falcon execution ID value to -1. Right. So again, keep the double quotes, just replace the value with -1. And now it won't be linked to that punch import anymore. Now, as I start scrolling down, you're going to start seeing this big, long string of characters, which is the value for the integration token, right? So the value is before the name, integration token. That big, long string of characters, I want to keep the double quotes, but replace the value between the double quotes again, keep the double quotes, but replace that big long string of characters with curly bracket 1, curly bracket. So that now it's going to grab it from this variable down below. And the very next field is the integration service identifier key. Again, it's going to be a big long string of meaningless characters. Keep the double quotes, but replace the big long string of characters with curly bracket 2, curly bracket. And that's it. This XML will never have to be edited again. The only thing that's going to be different in the future is it's going to be a different cookie, but I variabilize the cookie information. Now, some people don't like doing the edits in this tiny little window that Boomi gives you. So what some people do is they'll copy and paste the XML into Notepad. They'll do the edits in Notepad and then copy and paste that into this tiny little window. I've worked with Boomi long enough that I'm comfortable with this tiny little window, but it's your call. All right, so now the XML is good. So now the debug cookies is where I need to get a value for an integration token and a service key. If there is a value already in here, it will be for a cookie that no longer exists. So delete it and copy and paste in a fresh cookie. Where do you get a fresh cookie? Well, over here, I'm logged in to WFM as Sean Ivan, and this is a live session. I'm going to borrow Sean's cookie. And the thing about cookies is they'll time out if you stop using them. So if you, what I like to do is I just like to change the page to something. And because I changed the page, I now have a fresh 30 minutes on this cookie. And if I'm using it for test mode, I have to remember to come back here every once in a while and just change the page to keep this cookie active so it doesn't time out. If I'm using test mode and it times out in the background, then my test mode will stop working. I'll have to log back in and copy and paste the new cookie. So just kind of remember to come back here every once in a while and just change the page to keep the cookie alive. But how do I get to the cookie information? You need to bring up your browser's developer tools. And Chrome and Edge have different shortcuts to getting to developer tools. And I use Chrome pretty much exclusively. I've used Chrome for many years now. So I'm very familiar about how to get to developer tools. But the shortcuts are different in Edge than they are in Chrome. But one thing they both have in common is they both have this ... menu in the upper right-hand corner. And this ... menu has more tools, developer tools. And that is the same navigation in both Edge and Chrome, right? So Chrome also supports Control-Shift-I, which I never remember any of these hotkey combinations. It used to be F12, but for whatever reason, applications stopped supporting or stopped using F keys a little while ago. I don't know why they did that, but F12 it still works. So, but F12 doesn't work in Edge. It only works in Chrome. But whatever. This is what they have in common. You can do ... more tools, developer tools. And this will bring up your browser's developer tools. And if you've never used developer tools before, you're going to probably be on the first tab, the Elements tab. And it may not even be in a separate window like mine is. I think the default is that it docks inside the browser. So it shares real estate with your browser tab, which as a developer drives me nuts. So I prefer to dock it to a separate window, just so I don't have to share the screen. Now, if you're not a developer, you've never been here before, the only thing we're looking for is the cookie information. So I don't want the Elements tab. I want to go over to the Application tab. And on the Application tab is where you'll find on the left-hand side the cookie for your tenant. In my case, I see Train 21. And you're going to see a big, long list of information that Chrome is maintaining for this particular session. And I don't know what half this stuff is, but I do know that our API uses auth-n authentication. So I'm just going to filter this big, long list of meaningless stuff. I'll filter it by AUTHN, and it gives me a much shorter list to look at. And what we're looking for is the auth-n token and the auth-n SSID. These are the values that I want to copy and paste over to my build tab. So I'll double click the value for the auth-n token. That selects the whole value. I'll do Control C to copy it back over to my build tab. This is going to become the static value of the integration token. I'll paste it in there. And then the service key is going to be the auth-n SSID. I'll double click that to select it, Control C to copy it to my service key. That's it. You just borrowed a cookie from a live session. So I'll save these changes. All right. So now the cookie gets inserted to the XML. The XML is in the flow, just as if it came in from a live tenant session. So now I should be able to work in, well, there's one more thing I want to do, because I told you about this earlier. So I want to use a test document. So in the import data process is where you would retrieve your source data off the SFTP server. What I'll do is I will bypass the retrieve source data subprocess with a message shape. And I will copy and paste in some test documents to use. And I'm going to borrow Phyllis's records. So I'm going to use Phyllis as our test records. Since this is a file that my programming is expecting to have a header row, I'm going to make sure I also copy and paste the header row as well. But I'm just going to use Phyllis's 4 records here for my test document. So I'll copy and paste that into the message shape. And that's my test document. So now I won't need the SFTP credentials because I'm not calling SFTP. I'm putting my document directly into the flow. All right, so now I'll go into test mode. You can't deploy it like this. If it's configured like this, you can't deploy it. It will not run on a tenant. This is hard. This is configured to only work in test mode. So I'll have to click the test button. Yes, I want to save the changes. Didn't think I made it any. I need an atom, so I'll just use my regular tenant atom. They recently added this, which is completely pointless message. A test run of this process may take a long time because you have a lot of shapes. I don't have to tell you. It is what it is. I don't know why they tell me this. Ignore it. But I do have to set up my test extensions. I have to set up my API gateway, just like I normally would. So it's my tenant URL. /API, right? It's not an API gateway without the /API. I don't have to set up the UKG internal because I bypassed it. I don't have to set up the file name in the process property because I bypassed that. I put the file name, I put the file in there. And this particular test document that I'm working with doesn't need a cross-reference table. The codes that are in my source file are good WFM accrual codes. So as it turns out, this is the only extension I'm going to need. So I'll click OK. And it's going to spin on the start shape for a few seconds while it builds a package that it's going to use for execution. Just like when you're deploying it, it builds a package first, then you can execute it. So it's building that package right now. And after a few seconds, it will kick off, which is a big difference in performance. A couple of years ago, it would take a couple minutes before it actually kicked off, which was really annoying. But they've really improved test mode performance a lot. So hallelujah. So you can see that test mode is running. If a shape turns green, that means it executed successfully. If a shape turns red, that means that shape failed. If it doesn't get a background at all, that means it didn't get executed. So you can see the execution path it took and the path it didn't take. Right? Now, the first thing I'm looking for when I'm doing test mode is this callback subprocess, because this is the first time the API gets called. If I messed up something in the XML, if I messed up something in the cookies, then that API call will not have worked, but it did work. So that tells me I got my XML right and I got my cookies right. So that's typically the first thing I'm looking for. Now, I'm using test mode for a reason, right? I need to follow the flow and look at my data along the way. So if I select a subprocess like the import data process, which is where all the real work happens in the integration, I'll select the subprocess. And then down below, you can see the logs from that shape. And again, this is shape by shape logging. You're seeing, one shape's logs at a time. And then on the shape source data tab, you can view the source that's flowing into that shape. If it's a subprocess, you'll also see this blue arrow, which will allow you to drill down into that subprocess and see the execution of that subprocess, which is what I want to do. I want to drill down into the import data process so I can follow the flow. So I'll click on this blue process call arrow. It drills down into that subprocess. And now I can see the execution of that subprocess. And you know that if you select a shape, you can see the data that's flowing into that shape by going to shape source data and viewing the source. And what should be flowing into IAC source mapping will be my source document that came in from the message shape. And it is. If I select core processing, what flows into core processing will be the staging records that I built down in IAC source mapping. So if I select core processing and view that source, these will be the staging records that I built. And I can ask myself, do these look like good staging records? Yes, they do. Okay, well, let's continue following the flow all the way down to the API call. So the API call is down in core processing. So I'll select core processing and on the shape source data tab, I'll use the blue process call arrow to drill down into core processing. And in core processing, reset accrual balances is where the API gets called. Remember, when we're working with API subprocesses, we'll name the subprocess after the name of the API that it's using. And the name of the accrual balance reset API is reset accrual balances. So that's the name of this subprocess. So let's highlight that and go down into that subprocess. But at this point in the flow, my 4 test records are separate records in the flow. I know that when I go into this API subprocess, one of the first things it's going to do is to group the records or batch the records into batches of 100. So these will get combined down in here. So it doesn't matter which one of these I choose. I can choose any of them. So I'll just choose the first one. And those 4 records will end up getting combined into batches of 100. So this accrual balance reset was built on a slightly older version of the import template. So the shapes are kind of in a different order than what we see in the new import framework, but it's the same shapes. So here we're building the stage to JSON. Here we're logging the JSON request document. Here we're posting the JSON request document. And what comes out will be the response document in the flow. So if I look at the logging connector, what's flowing into the logging connector is our JSON request document. So if I view that, I can ask myself, is this a good request document? Are the objects being assigned, are the values being assigned to the right objects? Yes, they are. Is my data formatted correctly? Yes, it is. This looks like a good request document. I can see that when the response document came out of the HTTP connector, that it went down the 200 row, which means it worked. All those transactions worked. But the document that will be in the flow will be the response document. So I can view that. And, I can see how all those transactions went into the system. On the HTTP connector, every shape has its own logs. So on the HTTP connector, we can see the logs for the HTTP connector. And you can see that I got a 200 response code. I can also see that the post, I can't see the whole thing, so let me click on it. Opens up in a new window. It was doing a post to V1 timekeeping accrual resets. Right? So, and I ended up getting a 200. So using test mode, I can just follow the flow and look at the document along the way. Do my staging records look good? Did I build the JSON request document correctly? What did I get for a response code, right? So if I got a 207 or a 400, I could have looked in that response document and I would see the reason, right? Why it was a bad request, right? Or why it was an error. All right. And this warning that you see on an HTTP connection, this warning that transaction assistant is not applicable for this request, that's actually good news, right? Because there's no failed transactions in this request that has to get logged into the transaction assistant. But why it shows up as a warning, I don't know. It's actually good news. All right, so
Rick,
Fiona?
sorry. I just wanted to ask, you see here where it says flow control runs as batches of 10 documents. In this import, is the parallel processing removed? So did they just select the specific flow control?
This version of the accrual balance reset isn't configured for parallel processing. If I wanted to configure parallel processing, I could copy those shapes in from something else or just put them in here myself.
Okay, so they just removed them for this
Yeah.
specific reason.
Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
All right, so I have navigated all the way down from the main process, all the way down into reset accrual balances. And I want to go back up to where I came from. So in the process call, there's a back arrow that I can click on to go back to where I came from, which will bring me back up to core processing. If I click back again, it takes me back up to the import data process. If I click back again, it takes me back up to the main process. If I click back again, it takes me out of test mode. All right. So the experience with test mode is that you'll follow the flow and, do things look good at this point? Do things look good at this point? Oh, I find something wrong. What was it that made this wrong? Let me get out of test mode, fix that component, and then rerun test mode and when I get to that point, hopefully I would have fixed it, and then I'll find the next problem. I'll get out of test mode, fix that, rerun test mode, find the next problem, get out of test mode, fix that, go back into test mode, and at some point you would have fixed all the problems and you'll have a clean run. But test mode allows you to find all those errors one at a time so that you can fix them without having to redeploy them to a tenant, run it on the tenant just to have it fail, and then have to use process reporting to find the problem, and then fixing the component, and then redeploying. Test mode is way faster than doing all that stuff on a live tenant. But when you're done test mode, and you want to put this back so that you can redeploy it on a tenant and run it on a tenant, then you have to back out the changes you put in. So I'll disconnect my two debug shapes. I'll change my start shape back to a connector. And it was a web services server connector. And it says, oh, you're using a real-time listener. You should allow simultaneous executions. That's fine. Just make the recommended change for me. And I also have to set the listener back, the operation back to what it was, which was my accrual balance reset listener. So change the connector back to what it was, web services server with your listener operation. Oh, and also in your import data process, if you bypassed the retrieve source data, you got to remember to put it back. And if you ever come into a template and you see a message shape disconnected off to the side of the retrieve source data, it's because somebody was doing testing and they left their test document behind. That's fine. As long as it's disconnected and out of the flow, it doesn't matter. All right. And now my accrual balance reset is ready to be deployed again. Can we use test mode in our activity alfresco as well? No, I wish. I wish alfresco had a test mode, but they don't. And for those that don't know, activity is our workflow engine that we use for attestation and time off requests and smart views and all that cool stuff. But no, activity doesn't have a test mode. I wish they did. All right, this is just for Boomi. All right. So that's it for test mode. And again, while I'm testing, I would have to need to remember, since I'm using Sean's cookie here, just to come back here every once in a while and change the page so that there's activity. And now I have a fresh 30 minutes on that cookie that I'm using over here. All right, this will stay alive now. All right.
Sorry, Rick, I just wanted to know if the session expires, do you have to update the values that we added to our cookie?
Yes, you do. You'll have to log back in as Sean, which will be a new cookie that you'll need to copy and paste the
Oh,
new cookie
and
into
then
here.
edit.
You
Okay,
won't have,
thank you.
you'll never have to edit the XML because the XML will still be good. It's just the new cookie.
Okay.
Yep. All right. So sorry, got too much stuff open. All right. So what we're going to do next is a lab that we're going to do all together. And it's almost break time. And this lab is going to take us an hour to do. So, and once we get started, we can't stop. Otherwise, our cookies will time out. So I think what I would like to do now is to take our 15-minute break a little early. And then when we come back, we'll jump right into this lab. So let's do that. Let me put up a timer for 15 minutes. And when we come back, we'll do the lab. So I'll see you in 15. All right, if everybody's back from break, give me a thumbs up. I need everybody. All right, excellent. So we are going to do a lab all together. So let's everybody make your way over to the Boomi designer, right? So make sure you have a good session for Sean Ivan, and then make your way over to application setup, integration setup, design integration templates. And once you're here in the partner integration workshop templates, I have a broken accrual balance reset import that I do not want you to fix my master copy. So copy the broken accrual balance reset import down to your personal folder. And then once it's copied, close the workshop templates folder so you don't accidentally fix my master copy. And let's make sure that when you're down in your folder, you're looking at the broken accrual balance reset, not the regular one. Not the accrual balance reset import, the broken accrual balance reset import. And I think I have like 4 things broken in this, and they're typical programming issues that we've seen in the past. So it's nothing I'm trying to be sneaky about, the things that I broke. It's typical things that get broken. So I'm not going to tell you what they are. We're going to discover them as we go through test mode. That's the whole point of this. So in the broken accrual balance reset import, the main process, accrual balance reset, you'll see that I already have it started for us. I already have the start shape changed to a no data start shape. I already have these 2 debug shapes connected in the flow. They're not configured, but they're connected in the flow. And also, a couple of other things to show you. In the import data process, I have already bypassed the retrieve source data with a message shape. So we're not going to need the SFTP credentials because I bypassed SFTP. I'm hard coding my own file in here. And also, if you look at the file, first of all, I've got 8 records in the file. 4 transactions for person number 20176 and the same transactions for person number 20210. And they're all either 55 hours or 5 days. So if you look at these, their accrual balances as of the current pay period, because that's when we're doing the resets, they'll be all 5s. So you'll know if it worked or not. Now, also, these are not WFM accrual codes. These are accrual codes from their other system. So that means that there's a cross-reference table that's being used. And yes, there is a cross-reference table that's being used, but I hard-coded the cross-reference table here in the component, which I would normally never do. It's not something I would advocate. But for the sake of this lab, you don't have to worry about a cross-reference table in your extensions because I hard-coded it. And those 8 records are good records in the source file. These are good cross-reference table entries. So there's not going to be any problems with the data or the cross-reference table because this is good data. The problems are in the programming components that we need to discover. So I just wanted to show you that I've got this set up with a hard-coded file and a hard-coded cross-reference table. So you don't have to worry about the file or the cross-reference table. But we do have to get this set up for test mode. So this debug XML shape, I'm going to have to copy and paste XML into this message shape from something that ran on my tenant previously. So to do that, we're going to have to go over to process reporting. So again, I like to keep the build tab open at the same time process reporting tab is open. So from the manage menu, I'm going to right click on process reporting and say open link in new tab. That way I can have both tabs open at the same time. And we haven't done anything in the past hour, so we're going to have to go back 24 hours until we find something that ran on our tenant. And it doesn't matter if it was successful or failed. If it failed, it's because of your programming, not because of the XML. So the XML will still be good. So it doesn't matter if it worked or not. It just has to be something on your tenant. And you know who you are. I am 363. You are not. So click on the date and the time of a process report of something that ran on your tenant. And the start shape, one document flowed through that connector tile. So I'll click on the number 1. And here's that document. I can use the gear icon to view the document. And I will pause here and ask, does anybody want to see me navigate here again? All right. Oh, Aruna, what do you got? You want to see me do it again? Yeah. Okay. So again, in process reporting, I have to have something that ran on my tenant, and I'm 363. So I ran a punch import on 363 yesterday. So I'm going to click on the date and the time of that process report. And on the process report, the very first connector tile is my start shape. One document flowed through that connector. So I'll click on that document count. I'll click on 1. And here's that one document. I can use the gear icon to view that document. And if it's not formatted view like mine is, if formatted view is off, that's fine. You can just, copy the entire thing. If your formatted view is on, and you're going to copy it from here, you have to be careful when you select that you don't want the line numbers. So you have to drag your mouse on the right side of the line numbers because you don't want the line numbers. But you do need the entire XML. From the opening bracket to the closing bracket, you need the entire XML, but not the line numbers. So I'm going to Control C to copy this, and I'll close process reporting, go back over to my build tab. So in that message shape, I can Control V to paste my XML into there. So copy the XML out of process reporting, paste it into the message shape on the build tab. Or Notepad, your choice. And once it's pasted, scroll up to the top, because the very first thing we're going to have to edit is the value of the Falcon execution ID, which right now for me is 9. It's probably going to be something different for you, but whatever it is, we want to change that value from whatever it is to -1. And that -1 needs to be within the double quotes. So keep the double quotes. So now the value for the Falcon execution ID is double quote -1 double quote. That's the first edit. The second edit, as we start scrolling down, you'll start seeing this big, long string of meaningless characters. This will be the value for the integration token. I want to keep the double quotes, but replace the value between the double quotes and drag your mouse very slowly as you're selecting, because this window will scroll fast. And select the entire value between the double quotes, but keep the double quotes, and replace that value with curly bracket 1, curly bracket. So now it should say value equals double quote, curly bracket 1, curly bracket, double quote, space, name equals integration token. And the very next property, you'll see again a big long string of characters between the double quotes for the integration service identifier key. Again, keep the double quotes, but the big long string of values replace with curly bracket 2, curly bracket. Keep the double quotes. And that's it. This XML will forever be good. And if you did these edits in Notepad, you can copy and paste that into this message shape. Anybody want to see me do these 3 edits again? All right. So we've got the XML. We'll click OK. So that's good. Now on the debug cookies, we need an integration token and a service key from a live session. For the live session, let's go back to Sean Ivan's home tab here. And let's just change the page to something else. And we can go back, but now we have a fresh 30 minutes on this session. But I want to borrow this session from Sean. So from Sean's homepage here, I'm going to use the ... menu in the upper right of the browser to go to More Tools, Developer Tools, which evidently I could also do Control-Shift-I, which I'm incapable of remembering those things. But let's go to Developer Tools. ... More Tools, Developer Tools. And if your Developer Tools doesn't pop up in a new window, Developer Tools has a ... menu, and you can dock it into a separate window. I prefer this view. Of course, I use Developer Tools quite a bit. All right. Now, if this is your first time in Developer Tools, you're probably on the Elements tab, which is not what we want. We want the Application tab across the top. And on the Application tab, on the left-hand side, under Storage, you'll see the cookies, and your session should be there. Select your session cookie, and you'll see all the details for that session cookie listed. It's a big, long list of confusing stuff. So do yourself a favor and filter it by auth-n. And the reason why I say that all the time is to filter it by auth-n is because there's other stuff that's used by your browser, like auth-z. We don't want the auth-z token. We want the auth-n token. And that's why I said it's going to be confusing. Don't confuse yourself. Just filter the list by AUTHN. That's what we're looking for. So the value, double-click the value for the auth-n token. Well, first of all, let me ask, does anybody want to see me navigate here to Developer Tools again? This is one of the hardest parts about teaching a remote class is I can't see what you're doing and help you. All right, so let's double click the value for the auth-n token. That will select the value, and I can do Control-C to copy it, and then back over to my build tab in the debug cookies. This is going to be the static value of the integration token. So I'll paste it there. And now I have the token from a live session. Now I need the service key. So back in Developer Tools, the auth-n SSID, not the external one. It's probably the same, but I have trust issues. The auth-n SSID is the one we want. So I'll double click the auth-n SSID value, Control-C to copy it. And back on my build, this will be the static value of the service key. So congratulations, you just hijacked your first cookie. All right. Does anybody want to see me do those 2 copies again? All right. Oh, can you please show where we have to paste it again? So the auth token value gets pasted in this set property shape called debug cookies as the static value of the of that integration token, of that, sorry, authentication token. And then the auth SSID gets pasted as the static value of that one. Yep. All right. So, so now we have the debug XML message shape configured. We have the cookies configured. So let's save those changes. And now we should be able to run this in test mode. So again, we're going to have to click on the test button. We're going to have to select an atom. And you can just use your atom. And you should be able to tell which atom is yours. So choose your atom. And you're going to have to set up test extensions. So click on test extensions. And if the connection settings doesn't show up right away, give it a few seconds and then it should show up. But once it shows up, let's set our API gateway like we normally would. So it's our tenant URL. .cfn.mychronos.com/API. It's not an API gateway without that /API. We don't need the UKG internal SFTP connection because we bypassed it. And we don't need the cross-reference table because we hard-coded it. So as it turns out, this is the only extension we're going to need. So we can click OK. And it will spin on the start shape for a few seconds while it builds the package that it's going to execute. Then once it builds it, it'll kick off. And the first thing I'm looking for is for the callback to be green, because that will tell me that the callback worked, and that means I got my XML and my cookies right. If your callback is red, then something's not right in your XML or your cookies. So let me ask you this. If you have a green callback, give me a thumbs up. If you don't, let me know. I'll help you fix it. That wasn't everybody. Does anybody have a red? Oh, Aruna. Do you have a red one? A red callback? Okay, if you do, you can share your screen and I'll walk you through it. No, Aruna, I can see your hand raised, but if you want to unmute your microphone, talk to me or type in the chat. Oh, you could not share. Why can't you share? I can't help you if I can't see it. Well, that's not true. I can help you because I can see your build. Option shows disabled. All right, so let me go to your build and see what you got set up. Debug XML. Well, there should be a space here. That would actually be a problem. But the rest of this looks good. And your debug cookies, that is not a token. That's way too short to be a token. That looks like a service key, but a token should fill up the entire page. So you're going to need to recopy and paste a real token. So again, authent token should be a really big, long string. So double click, which will select the entire field, and repaste that static value of the token because you didn't get the whole thing. And then you should be able to test. Once you've corrected that, saved it, and rerun test mode. Error again. All right, so what's the error? Or where's the error? Oh, the error is on save initialized properties. All right. So save initialized properties is what parses out the XML. So if it's failing there, it's because you have an XML issue. So if I look at your XML, I got the opening bracket all the way down to the closing bracket. So that looks right. I got double quote -1 double quote space name equals Falcon execution ID. Value equals double quote curly bracket 1 curly bracket double quote space name equals integration token. Oh, the hell. I'm looking at mine. Dumb schmuck. Of course mine's right. I'm sorry. I should be looking at yours. So from the opening bracket all the way down to the closing bracket that is there. That looks good. Okay, so here's the problem. There needs to be a space after that double quote. We put the space in there. let me save and close my version of it. You close your version of it without saving, so that mine's the save that went in. And then reopen it and make sure that space is there still and rerun it. So XML syntax, right? We need every opening bracket needs a closing bracket. There needs to be spaces between parameters. There are some XML rules that have to be followed. All right. So now you're back on track. Excellent. You're most welcome. Boy, that's challenging when you can't share your screen. All right. So, and I just want to make sure that I'm back in my folder, and I am. And I got out of test mode. So let me go back in. And once you set up test extensions, it will forever remember it. So you don't have to set it up again. Just click OK. All right. So now let's use test mode. All right. So looking at the execution path, it went down the execution path where it said transaction failures was false, status completed, and it ended the integration with the final callback saying it completed. If that's true, this is what I call the happy path, right? There's no transaction errors and it completed successfully. That's what I call the happy path. If that's true, then that means those 8 transactions I had in my test file went into the system. And if they did go in, I should be able to go to Phyllis's time card, person number 20176. I should be able to go to her time card for the current pay period, because I did the reset as of the current pay period, and look at her accruals and see all 5s. And I do not. So the integration says it worked, but the transactions did not go in as expected. So it did not work. Right? Doesn't matter what Boomi says, the transactions didn't go in, so it didn't work. So why didn't they go in? I don't know. So we're going to have to use test mode to follow the flow to look to where things went wrong. So we know it's the import data process where all the real work happens. So I'm going to drill down into there. So select the import data process, and then down below on the shape source data tab, we can use the blue arrow to drill down into the import data process. And it got my source file. It did the IAC source mapping. It did the core processing. What flows into IAC source mapping should be my source data. And if I view that source, my source data came in fine from that message shape, as it should. If I select core processing, what flows into core processing should be my staging records. So if I select core processing and go to shape source data, view source, these will be my staging records. Do these look like good staging records to you? Anybody see a problem with these? The person number is missing. That's right. That's kind of an important field. For an accrual recess, you need the person numbers. I had the person numbers in my source file, but now the person numbers are gone. So something inside, so they were here from the source file, but they're missing from the stage records. So something down in IAC source mapping is building those stage records incorrectly. So let's go down into IAC source mapping to find out what happened down in there. So we'll select IAC source mapping on the shape source data. We'll click on the blue arrow to drill down into that. And the accrual balance reset has two source to stage maps. One is used if you're using a single record layout, like what ADP uses when all your accruals are on one line, or the multi-record layout, which is what everybody else uses, which is what my source file has. It's a multi-record layout. So it is correctly using the multi-record source to stage. Now, what flows into source to stage is your source records. So if you view what flows into that map, it's my source records and my person numbers are there. What comes out of that map are staging records. So if I go to the next shape and view that source, my person numbers are gone. So I am 100% positive that this component right here is what's dropping my person number. It was there when it went in, it was missing when it came out. So we have to edit this component. There is a map called multi-record source to stage that we're going to have to edit. So let's back out of test mode, right? So click on the back arrow next to the process call, which will bring you back up to the import data process. Click the back arrow again, bring you up to the main process, and click the back arrow one more time, which will take you out of test mode. But now we have a component to edit. So we have a map. If you look at your maps, there was a map called multi-record source to stage that we need to edit. So let's edit multi-record source to stage map. And expand all on both sides. And you'll see that the person number on the stage side is not being populated. That's the problem. So let's bring person number right over from the source over to the stage. So we fixed that problem. Person number wasn't being populated. Now it should be populated. So let's save and close the map. And now that we've updated that component, we can rerun test mode. And again, your test extensions will already still be set. So just click OK to rerun test mode. It will build a new package based on the updated components, and we'll try the new package. And once again, it went down the happy path, right? So transaction failures is false and it completed successfully. So now if I go back to the employee time cards and refresh our time card, I'm still not seeing all fives. All right, so it's still not working. Why not? I don't know, but let's follow the flow. So again, in test mode, let's select the import data process and drill down into the import data process. Prashant is saying the dates. If I look at core processing, right? So my stage records came out and going down into core processing. If I look at my stage records now, my person number is there, but the date is missing. That's actually okay because the date comes in later on, which is weird. I don't like that, but because I'm using the current pay period start date, it hasn't yet looked up the current pay period dates. So it's not in the staging records yet. And that's okay because that logic gets done later. But these, for what we have, these are good looking stage records. So far, so good. So why didn't they go in? I don't know. We have to continue following the flow. So now let's drill down into core processing. And Prashant, this is where that date gets added in. But this is where the transactions actually get sent into the API, but it's not even getting executed. So no wonder my transactions aren't going in. We're not even executing my reset accrual balances subprocess. Why not? Anybody see a problem? Yeah, it's not connected, right? That whole branch of logic isn't connected. If you look at my third branch, it's disconnected. So no wonder those transactions aren't going in because I'm not telling them to go in. So in my core processing subprocess, that third branch isn't connected properly. So we have to fix core processing. So let's back out of test mode all the way back up to the top and out. And now there's a process called underscore core processing that we have to fix. And that third branch of logic, you can just drag the end of that branch connector down to the split and connect it there. And if it's connected properly, that branch connector should be that teal color and the line should be solid. If it's not connected properly, the connector will be white and the line will be dashed. All right, so let's make sure it's connected properly. So now that branch of logic is properly connected. We can save and close core processing. Go back to the main process and rerun test mode. So it'll build a new package based on the updated components, and we'll try and execute that. Uh-oh. All right, so this is different. This time it didn't go down the happy path. We have a proper error. Error encountered during integration run. Please refer to process reporting for more details. Unsuccessful response code received from accrual bulk update 404. You should recognize this error message. This is the error message that we build after an API call. If the application status code isn't 200, 207, or 400, it's something else. And in this case, it was 404. So it was trying to do the accruals bulk update, but it got a 404. And if you know your HTTP application status codes, 404 is resource not found. but why? I don't know. I can't tell by this why. So we're going to have to drill down all the way to where the API call is getting made so I can see how it's getting made. So let's drill down into the import data process. And the API call is down in core processing. So let's drill down into core processing. And the API call is down in reset accrual balances. And again, it doesn't matter which of these blue arrows you click on. Just click on any of them. And you can see that after my HTTP connector, it went down the default path because the application status code wasn't 200, 207, or 400. It was something else. But what? So if we select the HTTP connector, we can see the logs in the HTTP connector. And sure enough, you can see a severe failed to execute the HTTP connector. And the message right above it, sending message to server, it's a post to this URL, but it's kind of cut off. So if you click on that message, it'll open the message in a window, and you can see the full message. So it's doing a post, as it should be a post. And this is a real API gateway server behind the scenes. But then it's /API/v/timekeeping/accrual/resets. And it's saying that that resource is not found. That's not a valid URL. Anybody see a problem with that URL? Yeah, it should be v1 timekeeping accrual resets. Somebody forgot to type in the 1 after the V. So we have a typo in that URL. And that's why it's resource not found. And typos is a very common mistake to make. So this, that URL is built on the combination of the connection, which is the API gateway server, your tenant URL/API, and then the operation provides the rest of that /v1/timekeeping/accrual/resets. So that portion of the URL comes from this HTTP operation called accruals bulk update. That's where the typo is going to be. So that's the component we have to edit. There's an HTTP operation called accruals bulk update that has a typo in it. So let's back out of test mode, all the way up to the top and out. And we're looking for an HTTP operation called accruals bulk update. So if we go to connectors, our HTTP connector, there's an operation called accruals bulk update. Let's edit that operation. And sure enough, there's the typo. It should be /v1 /timekeeping/accruals, plural, /resets, plural. So the rest of that's right. It was just missing the 1. So I'll save and close the operation and rerun test mode. It'll build a new package with the updated components, and we'll see how far we get this time. All right, well, it did not go down the happy path. It went down the fact that there were transaction failures. And I can see that if transaction assistant is enabled, field records can be resubmitted through the transaction assistant. No way. Those 8 transactions that I'm testing with, those are good transactions. They should have gone in fine. So the fact that they didn't go in fine is a problem. What's the problem? I don't know. Let's follow the flow and find out. So let's go all the way down to where the API call is. All right, so let's drill down into the import data process. Go down into core processing. And let's go down into the reset accrual balances. And you can see that it was a 400 response document that got processed. 400 means bad request. All 8 of those transactions were bad. Let's take a look at that response document that's in the flow, because the error message will be in the response document. So I'll select the split count, because that's something where the response document is in the flow. Take a look at the shape source data so I can view that response document. And all 8 of my transactions failed. And if I look at just the first one, it's telling me invalid employee ID 20176. Well, we all know 20176 is Phyllis. We've been using her the entire class. So that's a perfectly good person number. So what's going on with this? Well, maybe you can't tell by looking at the response document. So let's see what the request document looked like that we built. So the request document that flowed into the HTTP connector, if I look at this, here's the request document that I posted, and I can see the employee ID is being set to 20176. We all know 20176 is Phyllis. Does anybody see a problem with this? This is a hard one. Oh, very good, Thomas. Oh, very good. Yeah, IDs are internal database IDs. Qualifiers are external keys. Person numbers is an external key. You shouldn't be using 20176 as an ID. You should be using 20176 as a qualifier. So this JSON request document is getting built incorrectly. They're assigning the value to the wrong object. All right. So what builds the JSON request document? It's a map called stage to JSON. This is what builds that request. So, if you look at the next shape, the JSON request document, right? It's what's, the ID is incorrectly assigned. So we're going to have to edit this map stage to JSON and fix that mapping. So stage to JSON is what we need to edit next. So let's back out of test mode, all the way up to the top and out. And now I'm looking for a map called stage to JSON. And In stage to JSON, person number is being assigned to employee ID, where it should be employee qualifier. So I can drag the end of this line off of ID and then drop it onto qualifier to remap it to that other object. So person number should be going to employee qualifier. That's a mistake. So we can save and close the map and rerun test mode. You know, they have a saying with test mode: if you're having fun, you're doing it wrong. Because test mode is tedious. You can only follow the flow and find one problem at a time. So it's find a problem, fix the problem, rerun test mode. Find the next problem, fix the problem, rerun test mode. Find the problem, you know, and at some point, you'll get them all right. And then once you fixed all your problems, you can redeploy it to the updated version to your tenant and try running it on the tenant. But finding problems one at a time in test mode is much faster than trying to troubleshoot it through a tenant run. All right, so now it looks like it went down the happy path again, where there were no transaction failures and it completed successfully. I've seen that before. I'm not falling for that. So I'm going to go back to the time cards for Phyllis. I'm going to refresh her time card. And now I'm seeing all those 5s that I was expecting. So now the integration is working as expected. So we found all 4 problems with that broken accrual balance reset. We fixed them and now it's running properly. But that's the test mode experience, right? That's the workaround that we have to do to get it to run in test mode. And that's how you use test mode to find one problem at a time. Find a broken component, fix the component, rerun test mode, fix the next component. But that's it for this lab. Any questions, observations, sarcastic remarks? All right. So that's the end of this lab. We get out of test mode. What's this? All right. So everybody's favorite lesson, the last one. So after this workshop, what can you expect for support? Well, in Talent Central, there's 2 courses I would like to call your attention to. The first course is a course called UKG WFM Integrations Advanced Topics. And this is a course that I maintain in Talent Central specifically for people who have gone through this workshop, because I don't expect you to have to take this workshop again if you've already passed this. So if there's a change that comes out to an API or a change that comes out to the way the programming that we're doing inside of our frameworks or templates, what I'll do is I'll put together a recording and I'll dump it into this advanced topics class. And everybody who's been through my workshop before, I'll send you an email letting you know I added a new topic to the advanced topics class and you should go check it out. But if you look in there right now, it's basically just a place where I just dump videos for updates. Right? But this is a course that I would recommend that you add to your transcript and you just revisit it periodically. And if I dump something new in there, I'll let you know. The other course in Talent Central I'd like to point your attention to is Implementing Dimensions: Integration Training for Dimensions. Actually, they may have updated this course. It may be Implementing Pro WFM or something. Hang on. I have to know. I hate this single sign. Yeah, they have updated the course. The link still works, but they've updated the course name, implementing Pro WFM, integrating training for Pro WFM. So they basically did a search and replace for dimensions with Pro WFM. So the link will still work. That's in the slide. It's just that they've updated the course name. But anyway, the reason why I'm showing you this, this is a course that's designed for solution consultants, not integration consultants. So why am I showing you this? Because this course does a really good job of explaining the cross-reference tables that are used in the employee import and the tools that the solution consultants use in building that cross-reference table. And you will be working with employee imports, and you'll have to work with that cross-reference table. And it's a pretty interesting cross-reference table that's used. And this course does a good job of explaining how it works. Harry, I just saw your message in the chat about having an issue with the mapping.
Yes.
We just had to drag the end of the connection off of ID and then drop it onto qualifier. It's a drag and drop the end of the connector.
Yeah, 1 second. Shall I quickly share my screen? I mean, that is fine.
Yeah. So drag it off of ID and drop it onto qualifier. Oh, you don't want to go into the accrual ID. You want to go, no, you want to go into the employee qualifier. There you go.
Fine, right? No?
Yep, now it's right.
Thanks, Rick.
Yep. All right, so again, this course here does a good job of explaining the employee import cross-reference tables. Out on community, in the documentation section of community, the official documentation for UKG Pro WFM, there is the official integrations design guide, which is for us integration developers. This is the official documentation. There is, obviously, there's a lot of stuff in that guide that I've gone through in this course, but there's more in this guide that I haven't gone through in this course. So I would recommend that you maybe download this design guide and familiarize yourself with it. Global support. Global support is there for you when something is broken. They're not there to help you with your development. So if you can't figure out how an API works, or you're having problems with, developing some Boomi integration, that's not where global support is there for. They're there for you when something is broken. So how do you get development help if you need it? Well, we have people on the global partner enablement team with integration and API experience that can help you. And that's part of the partner support that you guys are all partners. This is part of your partner support. But the support comes from the partner team, not the global support team. And the partner enablement team has a request form, which is with this horrible URL that I would recommend you bookmark, because you're going to be using this frequently. But bookmark this request form, because this is the form that you can use if you need help. And if you need help with a template that you're working with, or an API that you're working with, you just can't get it to work, you can't figure it out, just use this form, say, I need help, And, if we can answer you in an email, we will. If we need to sit down and, schedule a 1-hour Teams meeting with you to work it out, we will. But this is how you can request help. This is also the same form you would use if you need templates copied into one of your customer accounts, which is what you're going to be doing all the time. As you start working with new customers, you find out what templates they need. This is the request process for getting those templates copied into your customers' Boomi accounts. And it's for all templates, right? Whether it's Pro, WFM, or HCM, we have all the templates that we can copy into your customers' accounts. And this is the request form for it. So again, we have like over 100 templates that my team maintains. You don't want all of them copied into every customer account, just the ones you need. So as you're going through your requirements discovery with your customers, you're finding out what templates they're going to need. Those are the ones you're going to request. And if they need something that we don't have a template for, you can always request the import or export framework to be copied into that customer account so you can create your own template for that. Now, where can you see the list of what templates are available to pick from? Well, I put down the links for 2 SharePoint sites. I don't know why, but for some partners, one of the links will work, the other one won't. For others, one will work, the other one won't. So I gave you them both. One of these should work for you. And this will be the list of templates and a little bit of a description about what they do. And this is what, okay, this is the template that I'm looking for this customer. This is what I want copied over. That's what you'll specify on that form. And if I didn't mention this earlier, I do want to mention it again, if I did. That templates were built by integration consultants for integration consultants. Templates aren't built for customers. They're built for integration consultants. It's what an integration consultant will develop to turn it into the customer solution. But customers can't request templates. Only you can. And then you turn that template into their solution, and then they'll own their solution. But only partners and integration consultants can request templates to be copied. Customers can't. But that's okay. That form will only work for you partners. It won't work for customers. Now, it's not just templates that are developed by my team that you can request. There's another team called the extensions team that develops templates. Where can we get this list? That's the 2 links at the bottom of the slide. Whichever one of these works, bookmark it. The extensions team also develops Boomi integrations, Boomi templates. But what they're developing are basically features of WFM. So things like prorated accruals or flexible breaks in Europe, or Mondayization, which I spelled wrong, in New Zealand, or average absence calculations in Europe, or transfer a report to the SFTP site. They have a lot of extensions and more. They keep adding new stuff. I can't even stay on top of it. So there is a community article out there that they maintain. Anytime they add a new extension, they put it in this community article. Plus, also, they have a SharePoint link here, which will list all the extensions and a description of them. So if this SharePoint link doesn't work, then you'll have this community article that will work. So one of these will give you the list of extensions that are available. So you can request those to be copied into your customer account as well. So this library of templates
that my team has access to, you do not have access to. And that's why it's a request process to have the templates copied. So you can put in a request that this customer, and give us their solution ID so we know what customer you're talking about. This customer needs these 10 templates copied. And then we'll copy those templates from our template library into that customer's Boomi account. And then you can take it from there to finish building them out in their Boomi account. Some of you partners also have your own sandbox tenant where you may have been doing your own Boomi template development in your own sandbox tenant. And if you would like to use one of your templates to be copied into one of your customer Boomi accounts, we can facilitate that copy as well. Just tell us the name of your Boomi account, the folder you want copied, the solution ID of your customer, and we'll copy that template from your sandbox over to the customer. So it doesn't have to be one of our templates. If you've developed your own that you want to use as the starting point. And I've seen this actually quite a bit where some of our partners aren't just UKG partners, they're partners with other major application providers. So your customers tend to have the same application mix. And you may want to take one of our templates, do some changes to it for things that you frequently have to do for your customers, and then you just want to use your template instead of ours. That's fine. We can facilitate that copy as well. What we can't do is copy from one customer to another customer. That's not allowed. A customer owns their solutions, and we can't copy their solution from one customer to another customer. For two reasons. One, it's their solution, and two, that's a security no-no. For SOX compliancy, we can't copy from one customer to another customer. No way. So don't even ask. The answer is going to be no. So we can only go from one of our templates or one of your templates to our customers. All right. So any questions on post-workshop support? So bookmark that request form. You're going to be using it a lot. And probably also bookmark the template list so that you have that list of templates readily available to you that you can research what templates you want. All right. So the last order of business is an independent lab, where I am going to be asking you to create a wage rate import from the import template. And this is a lot like what we did for the punch import the other day. We're going to have to model a transaction in Postman so that we know what a good request document looks like and what a good response documents look like, so that we can save those out and use those for JSON profiles later on. Shailesh, do we have gold template access? No, you do not. That's why we have the request process, because you don't have gold template access. All you can see is the list of them on the SharePoint links. All right.
Rick, I have one question.
Yes, Harry.
After completion of that input also, I can able to see 4 buckets only.
I'm sorry, say that again.
That accrual balance we did, right? Last one. After
Yep.
completion of a run also, I can able to see only 4 buckets, the time card.
You are unable to see the accrual balances?
No, I can. Shall I quickly share my screen?
Sure. Okay.
can able to see only 4. Fine.
Yep. Yes.
Yeah, okay. Okay, okay. But I can able to see the balance. Okay.
Yeah.
Thank
They
you.
look perfect.
Thanks.
Yep. All right. So getting back to this wage rate import. It's going to be the same process as we did before with a punch import. Model the request in Postman, save those 4 files that represent a good looking request document, a 200 response document, and a 207 success and a 207 error document. Then you'll be able, then in Boomi, make a copy of the import framework down to your personal folder. Rename the main process, rename anything that depends on the name of the main process, configure your flat file profiles, your JSON profiles. As you walk through the programming, as you find any process property references that have the old name, double click them, resolve them to the new name, configure the workflow as required, deploy it, install it, execute, and confirm your transactions went into the system. Now, that is terrible instructions. So instead, in your course book, the last few pages of the course book. Oh, and by the way, in your course book, all those links I gave you on the slides are also in the course book for, the advanced topics class, the solution consultant class, the integrations design guide. All these links are also in the course book as well. But anyway, the last couple of pages in the course book is the instructions for creating the wage rate import. So the first thing you need to understand is, what is my source file? And I gave you up on your SFTP accounts is a file called wagerates.csv. And the wagerates.csv is giving you person number and their new wage rate. All right. So wage rates are in the people editor under the timekeeper section of the people editor. And you can see that right now, Phyllis is making $44 an hour, right? So for Phyllis's person number 20176, this is her people editor. If I want to change her base wage rate to 45, oops, 45, 25, sorry, Phyllis. Wage rates are effective dated, and I want to use today's date as the effective date. And then click Save. All right, so that's the transaction that I'm asking you to do in the integration, right? Again, if you can do a transaction in the user interface, you can do it in the API. It'll be the same thing. So it's going to be this person, this wage rate, this effective date, and that's it. That will be the transaction. Now, there is an API for updating the people record. And in your Postman, get yourself a fresh access token, and you should see a person multi-update wage rate request. So this is the person's update API. It's a multi-update API. So you'll be batching records just like we normally do. But this is the person update API. You'll be using this a lot in your career. But we only want to update the wage rate. So I've got this set up to do 2 transactions, one for person number 10,002, one for person number 10,003. And you can see that the effective date is in there as Monday, which will be fine. And $15 an hour, right? So this is what the JSON request should look like, right? So that if you send this the way it is, you should get a 200, right? But now this is what a 200 response document looks like. So just like we did with the punch import, you're going to want to copy the request to a JSON file, call it wage rate request.json, copy the 200 response to a JSON file, call it wage rate response 200. And then to simulate a 207, just, sabotage one of these so it doesn't work. So like maybe change the wage, the person number to somebody who doesn't exist in the database. And I can assure you that one won't work. And you'll get a 207. First one's a success, second one's an error. And copy this. You'll save it as two JSON files, one with just a success in the results array, one with just an error in the results array, just like we did in the person record, the punch API, the punch lab. Sorry. So anyway, these instructions are in your course book here, right? So this is your source file. Use the person multi-update API request in Postman. Create these 4 JSON files on your desktop. Copy the import framework from the workshop template folder down to your personal folder. Rename the folder to something descriptive. Rename the main process to something short, descriptive, unique, and no spaces. Maybe something like wage rate import, would be a good main process name. And then rename everything that depends on the name of the main process, right? The connection, the HTTP connection, the logging connection, the web service operation, and its object option, all the process properties. Update your flat file profiles to describe what your source file looks like. Update the stage file, flat file profile. And remember, the goal of the staging records is to have your API ready data. What does the API need? It needs person number, effective date, and hourly rate. So that's what you need in your staging records: person number, effective date, and hourly rate. All right. And just, follow the instructions. And of course, you're going to need today's date. So you're going to need a map function in your source to stage map that gets the current date and reformats it from year, month, day to year dash month dash day. I even gave you a screenshot of that 2-step map function. So that's what you'll be able to use as today's date. But you should be able to follow these instructions, deploy it, set up the API gateway in your extensions, install it, create a parameter that prompts the user to provide the source file name, and run it. And if it works, you should see the new wage rates in your test employees' people editors with an effective date of today. So these are the lab instructions that I would like you to do, and you have the rest of the day to do this. So any questions on this, on the lab instructions? All right. Obviously, I'm not going to lead you through this. You're going to do this on your own, and you have the rest of the day to do it, and you can work on it at your own pace. But I would like you to be done at the end of the day. But what I'm going to do so that you can work on this uninterrupted is I'm going to end the Zoom meeting so that you can work on this on your own. But I'm still here at my desk if you have questions. And you can ask me anything. I will answer anything. I'll give you the answer. Yeah, just shoot me an email. I'll answer any question. Don't sit there stuck, not knowing what to do. Ask me a question. I'll help you right away, get you back on your way. But I'm still sitting here at my desk expecting to hear from you if you have a question. Also, if you finish, I'm sorry, when you finish, shoot me an email so I can check it out and give you some feedback on how it looks and let you know that, yeah, you're finished. Good job. You're all set for the class. Carry on. But I expect to have an email from everybody before the end of the day, either asking me for help or letting me know that you finished. So, any questions before we end the Zoom meeting? All right, then you have the rest of the day. Go ahead, finish this lab. Let me know when you're finished, or let me know if you have a question, but I'm sitting here at my desk looking at my email. I would appreciate conversations. So, all right, good luck, and we'll end the Zoom meeting.
Thanks, Rick. Thanks a lot. It's
All right,
really
you're welcome.
Thank you, Rick.
You're welcome.
Thanks so much, Rick.
Thank you, Rick, for the great session. Thank you so much.
You're most welcome.
Thank you, Rick.